Good morning, class 10. Welcome to today's English class. Today we would talk about one of the greatest icon of the recent times. We would talk about a man who had suffered at the hands of an extremely unjust society and had refused to break. Instead, he kept fighting against the injustice that was prevalent in his society at that time and kept pushing and fighting until he won against them. This man is none other than Nelson Mandela. Well, Nelson Mandela hardly needs an introduction. There is no one probably who has not heard of his name.
He was, in fact, the first black president to be ever elected in South Africa. So let us now see a short video comprising of the various struggles that he had to undergo and the subsequent achievements that he had attained in his life.
Born July 18, 1918, in a South African village, Nelson Mandela was first in his family to attend school. A talented student who showed rebellious tendencies early on, he was expelled from university for his involvement in a boycott against the institution. It was expected Mandela would become chief of his tribe like his father, but instead he chose to study law.
It is absolutely important that you have the knowledge to serve your country and your people.
By 1944, Mandela joined the African National Congress, or ANC. This left-wing political party wished to give equal rights and freedoms to the entire country. Within the party, Mandela was part of a group that formed the ANC Youth League, and this offshoot used grassroots methods to get their point across, including boycotts, strikes, and general civil disobedience.
That the task of the ANC was to unite the African people and out of them build a nation.
In 1948, the National Party was elected to government, and following that, it instituted a legal system of racial segregation called apartheid. Meanwhile, Mandela and the ANCYL continued their non-violent protests against racist policies. For example, Mandela was instrumental in 1952's Defiance Campaign, as well as 1955's Congress of the People. He also served as a lawyer for mistreated black South Africans by opening the country's first black law practice. Mandela was quickly becoming an enemy of the government, and he was targeted whenever possible. At the end of 1956, Mandela and a group of about 150 protesters were arrested on the suspicion of treason because of their advocacy. After a long trial, the group was acquitted. It was around this time that a group of militant Africans began suggesting that the peaceful approach was not working. This group formed the Pan-Africanist Congress in 1959. Soon after, Mandela changed his position and proposed that armed conflict was the only way to end apartheid rule.
It is useless and futile for us to continue talking peace and non-violence against a government whose reply is only savage attacks.
He helped found a military offshoot of the ANC called Umkhonto we Sizwe, and this group specialized in sabotage and guerrilla warfare. Not long after, on August 5, 1962, Mandela was arrested for a strike he had organized the previous year. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison, however, he ended up spending his next 27 years in jail. While serving his 5-year sentence, Mandela was also charged with sabotage, treason, and violent conspiracy during the infamous Rivonia trial. He was sentenced to life in prison and barely escaped the death penalty. Mandela's first years were spent in a prison on Robben Island, but he was transferred in 1982. He was treated poorly as a black prisoner, however he did manage to earn a Bachelor of Laws degree through a correspondence program. During this time, Mandela's profile grew, and he became an international symbol of anti-apartheid resistance. On more than one occasion, the government offered Mandela his freedom in exchange for the abandonment of his beliefs. Each time, he refused. After much negotiation, Mandela was finally released on February 11, 1990, at the age of 72 by the country's new president.
I wish to put it plainly that the government has taken a firm decision to release Mr. Mandela unconditionally.
Mandela then became president of the African National Congress and helped negotiate the end of apartheid laws. On June 17, 1991, the Population Registration Act was repealed, which meant that racial groups were no longer legally separated. This marked the beginning of the end of apartheid rule in South Africa. The country held its first democratic elections on April 27, 1994, with the ANC taking 62% of the vote. On May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela was sworn in as the first black president of South Africa. He spent his term rebuilding the economy and uniting the country. He even used the country's national rugby team as a rallying point for all citizens and as a way to bring the country onto the world stage in a positive light. When his term ended in 1999, Mandela retired from active politics. Despite leaving public life in 2004, Mandela convened a group of world leaders called the Elders in 2007. With figures like Desmond Tutu, Jimmy Carter, and Kofi Annan, the group aimed to resolve world problems like poverty, AIDS, and climate change. Among his many honors, he was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1993. Even after leaving public life, Nelson Mandela is one man who continued his lifelong crusade for a better world.
His life has been filled with ups and downs, with hardships and struggles, and yet he had never backed down even for a moment. He narrates of his efforts, the struggles that he had to undergo in his memoir, Long Walk to Freedom, which was published in the year 1994. This book, Long Walk to Freedom, is an autobiography of Nelson Mandela, which contains his ascent from an anti-apartheid activist to a world icon. This is the only memoir that was published during Mandela's life, and this book is a testament to the greatness of Nelson Mandela. Herein, he also writes about his personal and political ideas that he had gained during his tenure. A kind and compassionate person encourages the world to stand against injustice, oppression, and equality, and to fight for what is right. And this is what he states as the Long Walk to Freedom. What you have in your book is a small excerpt of the larger novel. This portion focuses on his swearing-in ceremony and the different memories that storms him during the swearing-in ceremony. This excerpt begins with his memories of 10th May 1994, when he took oath as the first black president of South Africa. He narrates in his autobiography that a large number of leaders from all over the world had gathered to witness of the swearing-in ceremony. The inauguration ceremony took place in a big open building in Pretoria, where the first democratic non-racial government was to be installed. On this day, he was accompanied by his daughter, Zenani. Before he took his oath, the first deputy president and the second deputy president of South Africa took their respective oaths, and then it was handed over to Nelson Mandela to swear in as the president. In his swearing-in ceremony, he pledged to obey and uphold the Constitution and to devote himself to the well-being of the people. He promised to make the nation free from poverty, deprivation, suffering, and all sorts of discrimination. When Mandela takes his oath, the South African jets display their military power. Sarcastically, Mandela points out that the highest military generals who now saluted him would have arrested him in his past years. But now, with him being the president, everything seemed to have changed. After his swearing-in ceremony, the two national anthems, one belonging to
the whites and other to the blacks took place, which marked the end of the ceremony. Nelson Mandela remembers about the days of the past. He says that those bygone days would be a part of history, and it would narrate the stories of whites forming a system of racial dominance against the blacks. And it was the basis of the harsh societies which he intended to overturn. He talks about the policy of apartheid. Now, what is this policy of apartheid that he calls? The policy of apartheid talks about racial segregation. So it was a policy of social discrimination that was followed in South Africa. This policy divided the people and labeled them on the basis of their skin color. Under this system, blacks were forbidden from living in white areas. Even trains, buses, hotels, hospitals, schools, colleges, libraries, cinema halls, public toilets, etc. were all separate for the white and for the black people. In South Africa, white did not give equal rights to the Native Americans. And it was this that Nelson Mandela intended to struggle against and abolish.
Mandela tells us that this policy of apartheid created a deep and lasting wound on his country and its people. So he intended to change it, and he substituted this policy of apartheid with a system that recognized the rights and freedom of all people, which saw all people as equal. On the auspicious day when he was swearing in, Mandela regretted the loss of thousands of people and remembered the sacrifices of all those who had fought against discrimination. He thought of himself as the sum of all those African patriots who sacrificed their lives before him. He was pained that he could not thank them enough. He recalled great freedom fighters like Oliver Tambo, Walter Sisulu, Chief Luthuli, Yusuf Dawood, etc., who were the men of uncommon courage, wisdom, and generosity, who had fought for the freedom. He says that his country is rich in minerals, but its greatest wealth is its people, and that goes for all countries. Nelson Mandela beautifully tells us that being black or white is not the token of one's goodness or superiority. No one is born hating the other. People should love one another, which comes without force as it is natural, and it is man's essential goodness. A man has to perform duties to his family and has certain responsibility towards his community, towards his country. And as a small kid, he had not seen this. He had not seen equality and discrimination happening, and therefore it took him some time before he pushed himself to fight for the blacks. He says that a black man was punished even if he tried to live like a human being and was forced to live apart from his own people. So he decided that it was his responsibility, his utmost responsibility first and foremost, to perform his duty as a citizen. And that meant seeking freedom for his brothers who were suffering under the oppressors. As a kid, like I said, Mandela had different meaning for being free. He wanted to run in the fields and wanted to stay out at night. But as he grew older, he understood the real meaning of freedom. He now wanted to be gain freedom for himself and his family. He soon realized that freedom was only an illusion. He realized that his brothers and sisters who looked like him were not free. Therefore, he decided to join the African National Congress, or ANC. His hunger for freedom became great for the freedom of his people. He desired that everyone should be given the right to live his life with dignity and respect. He wanted the oppressor and the oppressed to be liberated, as he believed that no one is free if one is taking someone else's freedom, then he too is equally oppressed. This lesson in particular, it pays tribute to those black heroes and patriots who waged a relentless struggle against the apartheid or the racist regime of South Africa. Here we also find a message of peace and unity of mankind. Mandela foresees a new regime which he believes will be based on the equality of men and women. He hopes that in the new regime, there will be no exploitation of man by another man, and that there will be no room for racialism and segregation in the new order. Thus, with courage, sacrifice, and strength, anything is achievable. He also highlights that freedom is important and should be valued. And also, if any race is deprived of freedom, then it should raise its voice and fight against the oppressors until they achieve success. And to achieve success, we need to work hard, we need to try. So we'll end today's class with Nelson Mandela's quote saying that it always seems impossible until it's done. So this was in brief today's discussion on the topic Nelson Mandela, Long Walk to Freedom. Thank you guys.